friends, it's Christy. Welcome to day 3 of my 2018 holiday card series. Today I'm making a card featuring the new Fall Buddies stamp set from Hello Bluebird, and I'm pulling in 2 cardinals from their Snow Play stamp set. So I've stamped my images out with Memento Tuxedo black ink on some Copic friendly cardstock, since I'll be coloring with my Copic markers today. I'm starting with my deer, and for him I'm using E51, E53, and E55. And since he is such a large image, I'm going to break him down into sections. So I'm going to work first on the top of his head, and then I will continue down for the rest of his body. So I'm starting with that E55 and using that to lay in my shadows. I want to add some depth to the top edge of his body and also to the backs of his legs. It's just going to help them look a little more three-dimensional and lift them off the page. It's going to give his body a little bit of a roundness to it rather than just laying flat on the white paper. So then I'm going to come in with my E53 and I'm going to pull in that E55, bringing it towards the center. I'm still going to leave lots of white space for my lightest shade, that E51, as I want there to be some highlights and have a lot of contrast. I did fill in the back leg that is on the opposite side to us completely with the darker 2 shades, since that would be in more shadow, but for the rest of his body I wanted to be sure to add that E51 for the highlight. Then I'm going to add in that E51 as the shadow for the rest of his body. I wanted it to be a lighter shade of tan. And then I'm going to bring in the E50 to blend that out. So I'll fill in the rest of his face. I'm also going to add a little color to the insides of his ear and fill in the chest area as well. Next, I'm going to be coloring the bunny, and for her I'm using W00, W1, and W3. I actually started with my W1, my midtone, because I wasn't sure how dark I wanted to go with her, and I wanted to just see how things went. So I laid that in first and blended that out with the W00, and then I decided to add some little accents with the W3. Bunnies are actually one of my most favorite critters to color, just because there are so many variations and you can really have fun with them. For her, I decided to add a little bit of darkness toward the bottom of her ears. I gave her a ring around one eye and a stripe down her back, and I also colored in 1 foot darker. I'm going to continue using my warm grays, but switch to some deeper shades. I'm using the W5 and the W7 to color in the faces of the cardinals. I used the W7 to add some shadow and also color in their beaks. And then I came forward with the W5, and I decided that it needed 1 more shade so that their eyes didn't get lost, so I added in some W3. While I have that combination out, I'm also going to use them to color in my skunk. I want her to look black, but I want there to be some depth and dimension to her and not just be like a solid black image that has no features. So I'm starting with the W7 and laying in my shadows along both sides of her body and underneath the white part of her tail. And then I'm going to come in with the W5 and pull that forward toward the center. The trick with coloring dark animals is to not lose their features in the depth of color. So it's really important to try to use some of your lighter shades over the eyes and nose and mouth so that they still look bright and alive. So as soon as I finish up with that W5, I'm going to come in with the W3, and I'm not only going to fill in the space that remains, but I'm going to push some of that W5 back away from her features. To keep everything cohesive, I'm going to use the W3 as my shadowed areas on the white parts of her body, and then I'm going to bring in the W1 to soften that up. I did still feel like it got a little bit heavy-handed, so I decided to bring in my colorless blender and push back some of that darker color so that it fades off to a nice soft white. So if you've been watching my channel for very long, you probably already know that red squirrels are one of my absolute favorite animals in the whole entire world. They were very common where we used to live in Germany, and I just adore them. So I'm coloring my squirrel with a combination of E15, E17, and E19. I laid in my shadows with the E19, and now I'm going to come in with my E17 and begin to blend that out. This is a nice reddish brown combo that looks nice and realistic for this type of critter, any critter that needs to have kind of like a reddish tone to them. So I'm going to fill in any areas that would be cast in complete shadow, like the leg on the other side of the body, and then I'll fill in the rest with the E15. I did feel like the darkest shades got knocked back a little too much, and there wasn't as much contrast on him as there were on the other critters. So I went back in with my E19 and added a little bit to the little creases and crevices, and then blended out a bit more with the E17. I wanted my cardinals to be a nice pinky red, so I went with R22, R24, and R29. So I'm laying in some shadows with the R29, and I'm doing this in the direction that they're facing. So the back sides of their bodies is going to be the darkest. Then I'm blending forward with the R24, and then I'm going to save a little bit of area on the tips of their tails and around their faces for that R22 to just soften them up, make them look nice and fluffy. Or should I say feathery? Either way. All that remains is the scars, and this is the area where I wanted to add some bright pops of color. For the deer, I'm using G21, G24, and G28. So I'm adding the G28 as my shadowed areas, just adding really carefully along those thin parts of the scars. And then I'm going to pull that forward toward the center and toward the tips with the G24. And then all the rest I'm going to fill in with the G21. This G21 is pretty similar to the G24, so it's just a subtle step down in shade. And I'm also going to color in the little fringe down at the ends. The bunny's scarf is going to be BG45 and BG49. So the BG49 is going to be my darkest, and then I'm going to blend toward the center with the BG45. The skunk scarf is going to be RV13, RV14, and RV17. So RV17 is going to be my darkest, and then I'm blending with the RV14 as my midtone, and then filling everything in with the RV13. I forgot to color in my deer's hooves, so I'm going back in and doing those with the W7. And last I'm going to bring in the RV11 and add a little bit of a pink tone to the inside of the bunny's ears and her nose, also to the skunk and the deer's ears, just a little bit there. And then I decided to give all my critters some rosy cheeks as well. So it's going to show up a little bit more on the lighter colored animals, but there's a little bit on the darker ones as well. I did skip the birds because it just didn't seem to have room. So now I'll just trim these out with the matching dies. For my background, I wanted to create a pink sunset sky, so I'm using Distress inks in Spun Sugar and Picked Raspberry. I'm sponging the ink onto some Bristol smooth surface cardstock. It has that vellum coating, so it does take a little bit more effort to build up your color, but you don't get any of the harsh lines that you do on regular cardstock. So I'm adding the spun sugar in the center towards the bottom. I'm going to have some snowdrifts, so I knew the bottom would get covered up, so I didn't have to go all the way down. Then I'm going to bring in the picked raspberry up at the top and just come down a little bit more on the sides than at the very top, just to have a nice fade, almost in like a U shape, an upside down U shape or rainbow shape, whatever you want to call it. And then I'm going to come back in with that spun sugar and blend that transition until I'm happy with it. I'll bring in my distress sprayer, add a few spritzes of water, let those soak into the paper for a few seconds and start to lift some of that ink, and then I'll blot with a paper towel so we get that subtle snowflake effect. Then I'll bring in my snowbanks, which were trimmed out with the MFT Hit the Slopes Dynamics, and I'm going to sponge a little tumbled glass right on the very edge of the snowbanks just to add a little bit of definition there. Now that my background has dried, I'm going to pop that into my MISTI, treat it with my EK Success powder tool, and stamp my sentiment with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'm using the sentiment that says, "'Tis the season to be jolly." This is from the Snow Play stamp set that the Cardinals were also from. I'm going to dip that into some clear embossing powder and heat that with my heat tool until it gets all nice and melted and shiny. Then I'll pop it back into my MISTI and I'm going to stamp out some snowflakes using Versamark ink. This is just a clear sticky ink that works great for embossing. So I'm going to shift those into a couple different positions and then I'll coat those with white embossing powder and heat set those as well. Before I put my MISTI away, I also want to stamp the inside of my card. I'm using Lawn Fawn Plastic Flamingo to add an additional sentiment that reads "Warm Holiday Wishes," as well as one of the little penguins and snowflakes from Snow Play. I trimmed out my pattern papers from Echo Park's Merry and Bright collection using the MFT A2 Stitch Rectangle Stacks Set 2. So it has that nice stitching border and it leaves a little bit of the cardstock showing through from your card base on the edges. And then I'm also going to add this plaid print on top of the snowflake as kind of like a band through the center. I've added some foam tape to the back of my focal panel, so I'm going to peel off the release papers and then I will line that up in the center of the card. And when I'm happy with where I have it, I'll press that down into place. Next I can add my snow drifts, so I'm adding some liquid glue to the back of each of those so that I can line them up and figure out where I want them together. I'm adding the back one first. I knew I wanted it a little bit higher up. And then I can add the front one and make sure that they're in the correct position before I press them down. And then I can begin to add my images. So I'm starting with the deer since that's my largest image, and that is going to go over on the left-hand side. There's a lot of empty space there, so that's going to be perfect for him, and it's going to kind of accent that sentiment as well because his one ear is kind of pointing towards it. And then the little bunny is going to go on the bottom snowbank right in front of the deer. I'm going to add the skunk up on the right hand side on the higher snowdrift, and the squirrel is going to go in that large space on the bottom snowdrift on the right. But before I add him, I wanted to make it look like he was making a snow angel. So I grabbed a W0 Copic marker and I'm just kind of positioning him where I want him and then adding that little shape for his body and his arm where it would extend out and try to make that wing of the angel. I increased the shadow up for his head so that would also have a little bit of a indentation in the snow, and then I decided to amp up the color with a BV00 marker. I just wanted it to look a little bit more shadowy. So I added a few swipes of that and blended it back out with the W0. I'll add some liquid glue to the back of my squirrel and then add him right over top of the snow angel. And right about then was when I realized that all that coloring had pushed that snowdrift out of position. So I just pulled that up, thank goodness the liquid glue had not completely dried, and fixed that. And now I'm going to add my little cardinals. So the one is going to go right next to the skunk, kind of looking up at her, and the other one is going to go looking down at the squirrel, making the snow angel. To finish off the card, I'm adding some Studio Katia iridescent crystals to the centers of the 3 largest snowflakes that you can see. The one is kind of covered up by the deer's tail, so I'm just doing the other 3. And I'm adding them with a little bit of Ranger multi-medium glue and my pick-me-up tool to just set them into place and then kind of push them down right into the centers of those snowflakes. And I also could not resist to add just a little bit of my favorite crystal stickles. It adds such a pretty sparkle and shine that I think looks especially great on holiday cards. So I'm adding some to all of the little critters' scarves, not completely covering them, just using it as an accent here and there. And then I'm also going to add a few snowflakes into the background. I'm barely squeezing the bottle, just tapping it lightly to get real small dots that are going to add a subtle bit of sparkle and shine. And that is going to complete our card for today. I'm going to lift that up to the light so you can hopefully see all that glimmer and give you another peek at the inside. So I hope you guys enjoyed day 3 of my 2018 holiday card series. If you did, please be sure to give the video a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to read your feedback. So if you'd like to keep on watching, here are 2 more videos of day 3 of the previous 2 years of holiday card series, so you can click on either one of those. You can also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I would love to have your support. I hope you all have an amazing day. Bye-bye.